Thanks a lot for this lively statement, and thanks for catching me. I had lied before. I had told you that there are three levels that we have to look at: the European, in Germany the federal, and then the state level. But then there's also, of course, bilateral collaboration, which sometimes is viewed in a little bit of a skeptical way in Brussels. But as you put it, it is sort of the backbone of European relationships, and so it's meant to be constructive, and in that sense I think we have to design it. Let us now, after hearing our very interesting statements by the keynote speakers and two contributors from the outer circle, bring in the other contributors and hear their thoughts as to how their work is being affected by the European level, what their expectations are from the European level and the policy opportunities that we are seeing there, and what kind of needs and requirements are there from their perspective. And we'll do this in 3-minute statements, so this is not quite as rapid fire as Jan Viada initiated this morning, but given that the clock is ticking and some of you have travel constraints, I ask you all to stick to that. And to let us know, how does Europe affect you? What is your sort of statement, your impetus? What would you like to be transferred to Brussels, but also to the national policymakers with respect to Brussels? And we'll start with Peter Guse, who is at Bosch, more specifically at Robert Bosch Startup GmbH. We heard about the importance of startups already. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Innovation, especially radical innovation, as the Inner Circle 2 talked about in the fields of like mobility and healthcare and agriculture. In order to be successful, they need to address basically two challenges, which is complexity and dynamics. Increasing complexity driven by the more and more technologies being involved in one product, one service that we are using, bring to the market, and dynamics coming from our markets by reducing the life cycle of products and the reduced time for developing new products. So how can we address complexity and dynamics now? Well, complexity, and I think Europe has great assets there. Complexity needs to be addressed by cooperation of multi-domain experts, because nowadays products cannot be designed by one genius alone anymore. That's long gone. We need cooperation of experts from different domains, and we don't find these experts in one place anymore, not in one company anymore, maybe not even in one country anymore. So we need cooperation across companies, between companies and the research sector, and across countries. And there the EU has a broad portfolio in science, has a great diversity, but the downside of Europe could be fragmentation, and the EU can bring a great contribution here by overcoming this fragmentation, by making it easier to cooperate between companies across borders. And then dynamics is easily addressed by speed. Well, in order to run fast, you actually need space to run. So when we translate it to innovation, in order to speed up innovation, you obviously need some freedom. And freedom comes in different aspects there. I would say it's physics, it's physical freedom, it's space. So like universities providing space to young startups where they can grow and don't have to care about finding the space themselves. So garages are not overrated, actually. They can be in a basement, of course, but the space is necessary. So space, culture, this is about education. So make people aware of technology and the importance of technology and make them more acceptant for technology. And finally, processes and regulations, of course. So especially startups in the early stages, they don't have the resources to deal with all these regulations. So along with all regulations that come along, like data, and I don't disagree that they are necessary. We need regulations, we need order in a state to rely on. But along with each regulation, there should be a service for small and medium-sized companies to deal with them so that we don't use their resources that they need for innovation for administration. And finally, there's funding. And funding, we heard it now a number of times, scope and scale. Funding needs to be focused on certain topics, the main topics that are important on European level, and they should really reach critical mass in order to be effective.
Thank you for your statement, and let me, just by way of preparing something, I'm hopeful that Professor Dr. Ulrich Radke is in the room here, because I would love to invite him to give his statement later. So this is just a call for preparation, okay? We'll continue with our inner circle, and I welcome Professor Britta Nestler, who conducts materials research at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. One of the novelties that we have introduced in Germany, bringing public research organizations and established successful universities together, in this case to an organization called the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And I should also say that she has been awarded in 2017 the Leibniz Prize, which is one of the highest awards you can achieve in German science. And we talked a little bit before already about what your expectations would be, and would like to hear about them.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Well, I must say I'm pretty lucky because I have been working in a field of material science which always allows innovations, and particularly I'm working in computational material science in combination with concepts from computer science. And so we actually are interested in using computational material science, materials models, to develop new materials in various different disciplines. So particularly in the last 10 years, we opened new collaborations, very interdisciplinary collaborations where nobody has thought of years ago. So we have collaborations with medicine and with geoscientists and also with climate researchers now. And well, our very, let's say, challenging task is to follow the line we have started about almost 20 years ago, where we developed our own software methods. And even almost 20 years ago, we thought of developing software in a scalable way so that we can use high-performance computing facilities in a very efficient way. And that was kind of innovative some years ago, and it is still innovative, particularly in the digitalization age now. So what are the challenges for my research in the future? This will be multiphysics applications, so to actually use even more complexity of the relevant physics in this to predict microstructures in various different materials and predict material properties, and from this to derive to gain some knowledge of how to improve materials. That is one challenge. The next challenge will be to develop multi-scale methods so that we can transfer information from the atomistic scale into the macroscopic component in production processes and other applications. And also to extend our international and European network, which has already been developed. But I must say, in the last years or in the past, we have more or less concentrated on funding from the state of Baden-Württemberg and also from national agencies, so German Research Foundation, and also from the German government. We also had a number of European projects, but this, I think, I would expect or would wish that we could extend European funding and European projects and European collaborations by funding, because we have a lot of European partners and a lot of nice ideas, also bilateral ideas with, for example, Austrian people from Italy, and then we have this idea, but there's no really program where we can fast get funding to realize this idea. Mm-hmm. And coming to the last point, I think all research funding programs should allow more freedom, like the Leibniz Prize. That allows a lot of freedom, but usually if you try to get funded, you have to be very precise and detailed in the description what you actually want to do, and this is not really possible if you have an innovative idea and you can't already predict what will happen in 3 or 5 years' time. So we need more freedom, one of my statements, and also we need less bureaucracy in hiring qualitative people. Because sometimes I have an excellent person and I can't hire him fast enough, and then he will go somewhere, and that is it's a big problem. Okay, that's...
Thanks a lot. And I think some of those admonishments were not just targeted at the European level, but also at the national level. Although with the Excellence Initiative and the improvement of financing in Germany, there's of course a vaster pool of money available here, which then may lead some of the talented German scientists not to apply or go into a perceived more complex European funding framework. That might be a perception that then stands in the way, or actually a factual assessment. Great. Let me turn to, I would almost say, a close colleague, at least in geography, of our previous speaker, Alain Barretz, Professor Hans-Jochen Schiever, the rector of the University of Freiburg, clearly not far away from some borders, national borders, and used to international collaboration. He's also the chair of the U15, which is another alliance aside LIRU. I'm wondering what your perspective on the European dimension is.
Thank you. U15 is a national alliance, not a European one. And sorry?
Why is it national?
It's a German U15. It's a network of the research-intensive comprehensive universities in Germany. And so from their perspective, this idea which the French President Macron put on the table in his famous Sorbonne speech is a brilliant idea, to create a real next level of cooperation between European universities, to create a European university. And as Alain Barretz already said, it's something different to networks. It has to be a totally different quality of cooperation. And imagine that those European universities, whether thematic or regional or type of universities or same types combining, that such universities are going to educate the next generation of young European leaders, that we combine our forces in research cross-border and bringing us making us as competitive as possible to our competitors in Asia and North America. And imagine the deal flow for innovation which come out of those alliances, and that's something really which would push research, innovation, and education to a new European level within the next decade. But then we have to reach a real different level of quality. And if you see what's now going on, I really appreciate the speed with which the idea of Macron was introduced in the Brussels discussion. But so far, it's only based on one DG, so it's based in the DG Education and Culture. So this is a DG which deals with the Erasmus program. But we do go along the whole knowledge cycle. We have to promote this idea of European universities in all key areas. It's education, it's research, and it's innovation. And of course, only when we combine all the three key issues, then we can really create European universities. And that means that we do need a kind of disruptive approach from the Brussels DGs to really bring up an overarching format where we combine resources from the DG Education and Culture, from research and innovation, from the structural funds, to really make it great, this idea. Scope and scale, which were already mentioned. So it must be something different from what we already have in place. And then this idea will fly. And so far, I'm a bit afraid that a large idea started as an eagle and will land as a boiled hen. And that would be terrific. And so, of course, it is not a project. If you start to build up complementary infrastructures, if you start to have joint professorships, this is not a project with a beginning and an end. And so we need a strong commitment from all member states to then sustainably funding such new European universities. Because if you would stop after a decade or even less, then it would be a great damage if you have started to jointly go forward with infrastructures, professors, and such things. But we have also looked to the added value. It's not in itself a value. You have to produce added values in education, research, and innovation.
Great appeal. I think it was directed at the two gentlemen just beside you, and we'll come back to it to see whether they would put their support behind it, because it sounds like a great plan, and maybe we should revive it as an eagle and let it fly again. Let me come back to the circle before we do that and turn to Dr. Özlem Türeci. She is a scientist, she is a startup founder of Ganymed, she is a leader of a Spitzencluster, so she's involved in many aspects, spheres of the science and innovation system, and you also have made close contact with the European dimension, I take it.
Yes, indeed I have. They are among those organizations which brought us to the place where we are as a Spitzencluster, so and an innovation hub in Mainz. What can I contribute beyond those very exciting and interesting contributions which were already made here? Before I go to the European level, there is another thing I would like to say, namely that we have to be aware of the fact that innovation is driven by people. We have heard some of them a couple of minutes ago, by people who are passionate and who are enabled to act. Which means that innovation always ignites bottom up and is not proclaimed top down. And this means that the national level remains to be an important one, the level where the bottom is, where we have ecosystems, the public-private ecosystems in which innovation is generated. So before this still remains a task we have to pursue. With regard to the European level, there are two aspects I would like to contribute. I think the European level, which is an excellent platform, will and can add further value. One of these is funding specifically of access, translational, academic science, startups, SMEs. This is exactly the problem zone in which basically the risk of getting innovation to execution is highest. This is also the zone where funding is an important problem, and this is something which I think can be addressed on the European level, in particular in the sector in which I am working, which is development of cancer drugs, where simply due to the sheer volume of investment you really need in order to develop a novel product before it can reach a big pharma interest is so high that we cannot master this on a national level, and this means we need European scale agencies, and what we also need is a system which in a smart way restores our private equity market and our venture capital market on the European level. So this is one of the wishes I would have on my list of wishes to the European organizations. Then the second one is, we already heard that disruptive innovation and breakthroughs, this is nothing new. However, historically, what is very different in our contemporary times is that we see this explosion of innovations and disruptions in interconnected areas and sectors, which are very diverse. And from my sector, for example, this means if we want to develop the precision and personalized drugs and medicines of the future, we need manufacturing facilities which are innovative, which are miniaturized, which are parallelized, which rely on automation and digitization, and none of this is in place. These areas evolve in their own pace, and this would be a very important task on a European level, to define in which interdisciplinary and sectoral levels we need funding and incentives to bring these fields together, which have to work together in order to actualize the full potential of innovations which are going on.
Thank you very much. We heard about startups. We'll turn to a startup entrepreneur, to Ralf Welzel now. He's a member of the leadership team at Delivery Hero. He founded Food Panda, other firms. Please bring in your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and speaking in the name of one of the very few digital unicorns in Europe. As it was rightly mentioned before, there are not that many. From our perspective, and speaking as a digital entrepreneur myself, having built many different companies over the last 17 years, I think we're still far away from a situation that we would refer to as impressive. I think we have reached like a good situation when it comes to digital innovation, but we're far away from being in a situation that we would refer to as impressive. And for me personally, there are 4 elements that might be worth pointing out. The first thing is still the access to talents. When it comes to digital innovation, and with us now being a company with more than 10,000 employees, a large part of that sitting and headquartered here in Berlin, we are still facing significant challenges finding talents for the new wave of digital innovation. A vast majority of our people are coming from outside of Europe, and we're spending a significant amount of time finding new talents outside of Europe because we're not finding them in front of the door. The second aspect is access to capital, and it was mentioned before. While we have resolved that situation for ourselves as we recently brought the company public, we had to spend an overproportional amount of our time, of our management's energy in finding capital, traveling the world, whereas like Chinese or US counterparts are finding it in front of their door. We had to spend significant amount of man-months or man-years on finding capital, and 90% of our capital base is non-European, even though we are a Frankfurt-listed company. The third point has to do a little bit with recognition and also reputation. I think we as entrepreneurs, and having been like, again, one of the very few digital unicorns in Europe, we're getting invited by the government in Pakistan. We're getting invited by the new government in Argentina to speak about our experiences. But like an invitation to speak to, let's say, European representatives, especially as there's so few digital unicorns in Europe, is still outstanding. We would like to shape, we would like to influence, but again, we're more invited by, let's say, governments of basically countries outside of Europe than being approached to get into a dialogue with us, speaking about the experience and how difficult it has been to build like a European unicorn. But last but not least, I think the most important point, also if we look into the future and if we take it as a more constructive approach, is what will shape the digital innovation in the future. And the digital innovation of the future will be shaped by everything that is happening around artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will impact digital revolution and digital evolution more than anything else in the past, and that in an exponential way. And also the Chinese government has made that one of the 3 main principles of the next year's agenda, to focus on the development of artificial intelligence. And what needs artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence needs, as one of the main resources, data. Data is the new petrol of the digital innovation. So if we speak about innovation, if we speak about keeping track with what's happening outside of Europe, we need to speak about data. And while we are not advocating for abusing digital data for political use, we still need a more streamlined, a more consistent, a more agile, and a more liberal way of how we should look into data. And that needs to be a European response and a European answer as well. Otherwise, and I think the Chinese efforts of working around digital data and artificial intelligence, which is one of the areas where they're not copying, where they're creating things themselves, they're coming at a faster speed and in a more powerful way than we could ever imagine. So I think there's also a certain urgency around finding a framework for how to deal with data on a European level.
Thank you very much. So this goes again into the direction of scale, commonality, and so forth that we can construct in Europe across national boundaries, because we're all pretty small, taken at the national scale. Let me ask Edward Whiting to contribute his perspective. He's Director of Policy and Head of Staff at Welcome. Welcome is one of the globally, most best known charitable foundations active in funding research programs in life science, but also in other fields, and of course collaborating with many other players in Europe and worldwide. What's your perspective of Europe, sir?
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to start with an apology, because I think it's my fault we're all speaking English here, and I'm very grateful for it, because my German is terrible. So firstly, thank you very much for your patience and allowing us to continue in this way. Wellcome Trust has been around for about 80 years. We're a large charity. We're spending about £1 billion a year on the life sciences now, mainly in the UK, but increasingly across Europe and elsewhere. We're based in Britain, and so we've gone through quite a turbulent couple of years when we think about our scientific future. And I guess another apology, I'm one of the last things standing between you and a delightful afternoon outside, so I'll keep things very short.
That's actually not true. We'll have a discussion round.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Rest assured.
Good.
So,
my main message today is, I think, don't take for granted what we're achieving as a group of European countries, and I can still say that as a Brit for about another year or so, but also look forward to the challenges that we will all face and think about the way that we can respond to those challenges. We did a little exercise over the last few months with the Royal Society in the UK and then a wide range of organisations, over 200 across Europe, looking at both Brexit and also what it means for the framework programmes and beyond, and published a short report which I'm happy to give out and refer to online. But one of the main things that we found, one of the messages we heard, was it's going to be really important to have a broad, inclusive European research base. I mean, more important than it ever has before. I think for two reasons. Firstly, once the UK does leave the EU, many things will stay the same, many things will change. 6 of the world's top 20 universities will be in the wider European research area and not the EU 27 post-Brexit. So there is a critical mass of academic institutions that are associated with Europe, and we hope formally associated with Europe in the future, but not in the EU 27. The balance does change between associated countries, and I say I'll come back to the deal that I hope we'll be able to strike with the UK outside of it. And I think it is an opportunity to think about what this broader sector, this broader community can do together. And what I hope is that it can be the start of, without being too naive, the start of a longer process of thinking about how that bigger group can come together and work together. One thing that we heard that was really important was the common values that Europe has created and developed around the treatment of data, animals, animal testing, open science and open data. And those values that pervade science now, and certainly from Wellcome, we fund a lot in genomics. And genomics, the values of open data in genomics were created by conscious decisions 30 or so years ago. Those decisions taken in Europe and enshrined across Europe, and they drive the way the field works in the minute. What we heard, though, is that that may not be the case in future, because those countries that are investing now in multiples of what the EU is investing in R&D, so China is roughly 3 times what the EU is investing in, they don't necessarily have and bring the same values to research, and we can seek to influence those values. But we can also say, how can we continue to build a critical mass of commonality, of exchange, and of those values and of those norms? And while we look ahead to certainly another turbulent year or so on Brexit, for us in the Wellcome Trust and what we heard from around Europe is there is an opportunity to sign what we hope is an ambitious UK-EU deal on science that should get the UK to the right place as an associate member country, but more importantly, for the longer term, builds a European research area that genuinely does look outside of the European EU 27, which the framework programs have done a good job of doing so far, but really seeks to take those complementary strengths. We've mentioned Israel a number of times today, and what the Israeli research intensity is phenomenal and is an asset for Europe, and we should think about how we can sort of build on that. When we think about those exam questions of what those pan-European capabilities really are, we shouldn't forget about knowledge and excellence. It would be so difficult to recreate and rebuild the European Research Council, to redo what the ERC has done. It took enormous political courage to make it happen, and we need to shout for it. And I speak from a country where we haven't been very good at shouting for those benefits, and look where we are now. So we must continue to do that. The other thing that I think we can do is look at policy and look at common policy and how common policy can create conditions for scale of innovation. Look at how, for instance, common cohorts of patients the clinical trials are sometimes only possible on a European basis rather than a national basis. Look at how we can combine national industrial interests with international science. And I think so far we sometimes don't really make the most of those two things. Great science is very often, if not always, truly international. Industrial interests are national, often, and we need to be honest about those common capabilities, but also recognize if you're producing anything complicated, it usually involves some fabrication in more than one country, normally sort of 5 or 6 countries, so you need some form of cooperation. And I think we could possibly do a better job of recognizing those different starting points, as we have done throughout today, and continue to build a system that recognizes those. The last thing I say is on challenges and missions, and a lot has been said today, so I won't repeat that. We're looking at, in Welcome, at how we can do, and again, it won't be DARPA-like funding, but it'll take that sort of risk approach and say, well, how can you encourage risk-taking in a way that is sort of constructive and creates breakthroughs and makes the biggest value for science? And one of the things we've realized is you should look at each funding mode and respect what's good about each funding mode. Excellent response mode science and knowledge and hypothesis-driven science needs strong peer review and needs a strong sense of saying, what is that excellence and how do we recognize and reward that excellence? Sometimes when you're looking at breakthrough science and you're looking at a high failure rate potentially, you may take away some of those elements of peer review and say, we're going to trust your hypothesis. We're going to allow you to have a go at whatever it is you're doing. But to do that, you need to loosen some of those constraints, and you need to take a sort of a portfolio approach to the way that you're doing your funding, so that with that risk funding, you can say a lot will fail, but those that succeed will be enormously exciting. And I think what we're learning within the Wellcome Trust and talking about certainly with the British government too, is saying better respect each of those modes. Don't see each in competition to one another. You need knowledge, hypothesis-driven basic knowledge to drive scientific creation and also incremental and breakthrough progress, but you probably need some risk-driven science too. And you need something that loosens those constraints in a managed way. And you also need then those big challenges that draw the world together and says, well, how do we bring together those capabilities we have around as diverse a scientific community as we have in Europe to solve a big challenge, like plastic pollution, like how we use artificial intelligence in the community. There are plenty of challenges that can both inspire and communicate to society. And the very final point, I think I will only just echo and repeat what everyone else has said. We are a living proof of what happens if you do not communicate the benefits. We need to keep on looking at how we communicate what scientific funding is delivering and make sure that is a core part of how we all talk about Europe in the future. And I do include how Britain talks about Europe in the future, because I hope that we can associate and be part of it.
Yeah. I think you brought up many points. The organizers are, by the way, nervous that you all reach your planes and trains and so forth. So let me bring a few things back together, but it will take a few more minutes to do that. Because I don't want to send you home without a sort of a little bit, or at least an attempt at some conclusion and closure. I think you made the point very clearly that we may be already pretty good at science, and you made some good points what needs to be done further to include, for example, Britain in the science space, but whatever framework we have several to choose from, and I think on all sides that is a very good thing. I think we heard from our French colleagues that there is a great willingness to sort of engage in at the bi-national level to sort of build core relationships that then can be extended to the European level and would be very helpful for Europe as a whole. I think we heard the need for the innovation part of this path from science to innovation. You have mastered it very successfully, but we'd love to see more success stories like yours, of course, in Europe. We'd love to see, by the way, more companies who have the kinds of problems that you are describing here of collecting talent and bringing that to turn it in a positive way. What I've heard is also the need for more commonality. I think that came through in your point, and ERC has provided that. So it probably falls under the Riesenhuber rules that we have heard about and that we cherish so much in this country. Commonality in the research area, in the common market, in data access, in data markets, but also in regulatory scale. And I promised you one statement from Ulrich Radke, whom I will not asked to stand up now. I will just tell you what it is. He said the common market of the EU with 511 million citizens permits to upscale initiatives in the field of innovation and industrial policy and in regulation. Google will listen when 500 million consumers are at stake. They may not even come to the party when it's just Germany, okay? And I think we in Germany should watch that very closely and not get too carried away with the successes that we may have had. Of all the funding schemes that we have talked about, I would like to come back to one, and that was the Macron idea of sort of linking European universities in a network, have common curricular, have more mobility, and so forth. And I was wondering what our people who are working in Brussels here, when they have their ears on the ground, is that something that could get some support and traction in the next financing rounds that we're looking at? So I'm turning back to you, to our first two keynote speakers, for a very short answer, if I may ask.
Well, very quick reaction. I think it's a fantastic initiative. And I think we also can be grateful that now we have a president in France who really talks about science innovation. In the past, the presidents of France only were interested in agriculture subsidies, to be quite frank. And now we have one who's passionate about science innovation, who's passionate about universities. And I think it's just amazing. It's very impressive. And by letting our universities join forces, we can really upgrade their excellence and their impact on our society, as you already mentioned. So I'm a very strong supporter of this initiative. Whether it should lead to new institutions is another question. You can also take this in a different way, but bringing the best of our universities together, going to smart specialization, and having students go from one country to another and to be exposed to different cultures, I think is just a fantastic initiative. So big support from our side, and don't worry, we are working with the different directors general to make sure that this becomes a reality.
Professor Bourguignon?
Thank you. Actually, you quoted me here during the short presentation in the beginning of the day on the effort by the European Research Council to really work on interdisciplinary research, because we do feel that one of the things which has not been, of course, was not the spirit of ERC to start with, was really to create this so-called synergy program. The first attempt was not very successful for the reason that it was so oversubscribed that it was not working. But really, at the level of the Scientific Council of ERC, we are very committed to have these joint initiatives by researchers in the small numbers, because we don't want to have huge things. And therefore, we really feel that getting researchers together to organize some things on a very challenging scientific problem is definitely something we want to do. My final word maybe will be on something which nobody has addressed very directly, which is the fact that altogether Europe is an aging continent. Of course, there are others like Japan, but I think this is something we have to keep in mind. And you said you have difficulty finding collaborators, and typically I'm sure you're looking for young collaborators. In the case of ERC, you know, we have all the people working in the teams, and 1/3 of them are coming from outside Europe, and many of them from Asia or other continent. And so I think Europe needs to be welcoming young people coming from everywhere with their talents. And actually, this is really one reason why Europe has to propose a very attractive environment.
Thank you very much. I think we can leave it at that particular plea. Europe seems to have a great future, but we need to work a little bit on it. I conclude this particular task. Please give everybody here a round of applause. And